Welcome to another segment of iBerkshire's Download, where we speak to the people and projects who are impacting Berkshire County. Our guest is Jason LaForest, Executive Director of the Hoosic River Revival, an ambitious plan to renovate the waterway that flows through the center of North Adams. Could you give us a little background on the Hoosic River Revival?
The Hoosic River Revival was an initiative begun by Judy Grinnell and a host of sponsors about 10 years ago, after Judy recognized that the flood control system in North Adams was both unsightly and seemingly in need of a facelift.
Well, there's been a lot of concern about taking out the flood control chutes. I mean, it's been interesting that North Adams is sort of grew up around the river because it used it in industrial purposes and for transportation. And then it became sort of wild in the beginnings of the last century. We had a number of really destructive floods, and so suddenly it was contained in these concrete chutes. Now, there's concern, obviously, that taking down the chutes will put the city at risk again. But now the idea is to sort of live with the river. And how does the River Revival, how does that concept work?
Sure. So there's a couple of really great points there. One is there is no real plan to remove the flood control chutes per se. However, we recognize, and even the Army Corps recognizes, that the way flood control is managed in the 21st century is very different than the way it was in the 1930s and 40s when these flood control chutes were engineered and the construction began. So if they were to put in, if there were no flood control system right now and the Army Corps were to come in, they would be putting in a system that looks very different than the concrete flood control chutes that we've known over the last 70 years. But there are some really great opportunities to both repair the existing flood control chutes and make the river more accessible and safer for the residents of North Adams.
And where's the first step in this project? Where's that going to be located?
So the Army Corps of Engineers asked us to begin at one end of the system or the other. So with our very good and generous partners, our technical advisors at the Division of Ecological Restoration, it's part of Massachusetts Fish and Game, we have created a conceptual design for a revised river and accompanying ball fields along the Knollfield corridor. Sasaki Associates, a major international design firm, has created some great schematics, some great designs, and these pay very close attention to the hydraulic and hydraulic also flow of the river.
Okay. And this area we're talking about is by the Knollfield Athletic Complex, which some people may realize is where Joe Wolf Field is, where the baseball stadium is. And it's undergoing a complete transformation over the last several years.
Yes.
Where they've been new courts in there, the skate park, and all this. And so part of the plans have been for the river are, acknowledge that this new work has been done down through this area to make it really a place for the people of North Adams and surrounding communities to come and to recreate.
Yes.
And so it's all this whole design to allow people to sort of interact with the river, I guess is the word.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Because right now there's these huge berms. That's because there's no concrete down that end.
Right.
It's these giant berms that come down. And I remember when there was the duck race a year or so ago. It was kind of difficult to sort of see how that worked. But so this plan is sort of, if I remember correctly, it's sort of like stepped. Is that correct?
In some areas.
In some areas?
Yes.
So you'll be able to actually get down to the river, but it'll be so the river, when it gets high, can sort of overflow.
Yes. Yeah, essentially. So we would be returning the sort of natural floodplain to the river, removing the earthen berms, but the same level of flood protection would exist. It would just look very different, allowing safe access to the river. The river really is the reason that North Adams is where it is, beginning in the 1730s, 1740s, and then we know we have a rich industrial heritage. But the mitigation of flood risk, the flood control chutes, took the river away from the city completely. So, people really only think about the river when it's at high capacity. Day to day, we don't really see the river or look at the river. But I think, the tourists hotel and project on the west end of town really speaks to how we can integrate the river into our daily lives. So the Phase 1 project along Knoll Field, makes the river part of the athletic complex, and it ties that entire area into the downtown commercial center.
So you're also having to partner with a number of other stakeholders in the area. You talked about Mass Wildlife. Along that area, there's also plans for the Railroad Museum, the Extreme Model Railroad and Architecture Museum. Is that correct? And you recently had to sign a document with them about the use along that line, right?
Yep.
Now, and how did that work?
So we're sort of going to move the river a little bit. It'll go back to its original course, essentially. So we're going to allow the river to function as a river, allow fish. The Hoosic River has one of the only confirmed breeding native brook trout populations in the state. So it's, in terms of fish and wildlife, it's a very important river. But so to your point, yes. So we worked with EMRCA, Tom Krenz, the Model Railroad and Contemporary Architecture Museum, on an agreement, a working agreement, so that one portion, I think it's about 8,800 square feet, just a tiny little bit of land, would be available to us on the south end of their property, the old Sons of Italy property, to allow actually an extension. We talk about, there's a misconception that we want to take out the flood control system. We actually want to extend the wall on the east side of the river, but that will allow us to make the rest of the river in that area accessible. Yeah. So it's a great project. It'll include upgrades to all of the ball fields that so many organizations use. And in addition to EMRCA, the scenic railway goes through there. The bike path eventually, the Mass DOT bike path, the Ashwiltacook Trail will come through there. I know there are plans for extending the hiking trail circuit through that area, and it will be accessible to MCLA and all of the residents and visitors to the city.
So there's a lot of working parts to this to make this
there really is,
work with these partnerships. So as you pointed out, it's been almost a decade since the first conception to get to this point. So what is the next step for the revival?
Well, this is a big project. These are very long projects, and projects of this scope sometimes take 30 to 50 years to reach completion. And it is sort of a novel project because typically you don't see the removal of an existing flood control. You see, the introduction of flood control, but this would actually remove the Army Corps' design in that one area. We're only talking about a half mile of river. Right. We're not talking about the whole system. We're not talking about downtown. And it would replace it with 21st century technology. So obviously, this sounds expensive, and it is expensive. We're looking at approximately a $30 million project just for that half-mile corridor. And, we're working on a series of state and federal funding options to, reach completion.
Yeah. It's a big step.
It's a big step, yeah. But an important one for the city.
So right now you're going through a lot of permitting processes, and is that even started, the permitting process?
We haven't started the permitting process. Okay. We're still working with Division of Ecological Restoration and primarily Sasaki and a couple of their subcontractors to get the design to a 60% design phase, at which point the Army Corps of engineers will review the design. They'll make some tweaks to it, and it will go back out for completion to get it to 100% design phase. So as you know, we have had a lot of rain the last 6 or 8 weeks. Mayor Bernard referred to it as monsoon season in North Adams last night, and that's pretty appropriate. So we've had some surveyors working on the property along Knoll Field and the Sons of Italy property, and they've actually been doing some in-channel survey. This is a very, very scientific approach. This isn't just, we're not just going in and taking out the flood control. There's a very scientific methodology to flood control, but unfortunately they haven't been able to get into the river because the water's been a little high. So we're finishing up that work right now, and we'll have a report and an augmented design available sometime this summer.
Do you have a projected start time?
Not at this point. It's still a pretty lengthy process between the Army Corps review. Peer review will happen after that, and then we'll have to continue to work on the funding sources to
So this is a few years
project.
out at least.
I will have more gray hairs when this is completed. Yes. Yeah.
So, well, we're hoping to see some work done before we retire, right?
I would like to, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
But this is a huge project, even though it's only this one section, and we're hoping to see that come to fruition.
Yeah, it's a critical project for the city. We do need to start at one end of the other, as I said, but there's a lot of repair work that needs to be done throughout the system, and we are working on that also.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's been an interesting conversation, and we'll have to bring you back and do some updates as we
Great.
go along with this, so people don't forget that it's happening.
Okay.
Because a lot of work is going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely,
that
yes.
we don't know about.